In this episode, a man is dragged underwater as he makes an estuary crossing on his surfboard. A saltwater crocodile begins its death roll, tearing the man's leg, almost ripping it from his body. Then it comes back for more, popping up right next to the man, right in front of his face. Hit like and subscribe. This is Fierce. 59-year-old Arthur Jon Becker was from Boulder, Colorado, but he had fallen in love with Costa Rica. So much so that he bought a home there and spent many years living in the beautiful Central American country. His eldest son followed him out there for a year whilst he completed his junior year of high school. More recently, though, Jon had returned to the States and only visited his Costa Rican home throughout the year. He remained friendly with the locals and enjoyed being part of the local community. His holiday home was situated in Tamarindo on the Pacific coast of Costa Rica. It's popular for surfing and ecotourism, with many visitors flocking there to witness leatherback turtles crawling onto the sand to lay their eggs each year. The beaches are stunning, the surf is enticing, and the wildlife is incredible. Jon and his sons Joran and Avi were keen surfers, and Costa Rica offered plenty of opportunities to enjoy their hobby. Jon's favorite surfing spot was between Playa Tamarindo and Playa Grande. These two beaches are separated by an estuary. Regular passenger ferries transport people from one side of the estuary to the other, but for surfers it's just as easy to paddle across. It's not far, taking just a couple of minutes to paddle over at high tide. You can even walk across when the tide is out. Jon had made the paddle many times before. He and his family had been visiting that same spot for 14 years. On the 22nd of July 2016, he walked along the sandy beach with his friend Edgar Sanchez. He walked past the small yellow sign sticking out of the sand, a sign with a silhouette of a crocodile on it, but people took no notice of it. Dogs were occasionally taken by the large reptiles further upriver, but the locals often swam in the warm waters, ignoring the potential danger of crocodiles. They just didn't come that far down the river. Jon was almost like a local. He had lived in the area permanently for years, and now that he returned to the U.S., he made the journey back there regularly. He was well known in the town and had made friends in the community. For the last few days, Jon and Edgar had been heading down to the beach at dawn. As the sun came up over the horizon, bathing the sea in its warm glow, they paddled across the estuary from Playa Tamarindo to Playa Grande for a morning surf. After a couple of hours, they then headed back, paddling back across the estuary. On the 22nd of July 2016, however, something was different. A crocodile swam downstream toward the river's mouth. It was early morning, just after dawn. It was actively hunting, searching for prey, an opportunistic hunter lurking in the shallows. Jon and Edgar stepped into the river. It was high tide. They climbed onto their surfboards, laying face down, and paddled across the river. The predator moved closer, shielded by the reflective water's surface. It lay on the bottom of the riverbed, its eyes open, scanning the surface. This time, Jon and Edgar were lucky. They made it to the other side of the estuary, climbed out, and walked along the beach until they paddled back out into the open sea to beyond the breakers. They had a great time surfing, as usual, before calling it a day and heading back in. This was their routine. They thought nothing of it. When they came to paddle back across the estuary, Edgar went first. He pushed off from the shore with his feet as he glided across the river, face down on his board. Jon followed. But as he went to climb onto his board, he felt a sharp tug on his leg and was instantly dragged underwater. He didn't have time to take a breath. He just let out a yell of surprise and was gone. Edgar heard his cry and looked around. To his shock, he saw Jon's surfboard floating on the surface of the water and no sign of Jon. He quickly turned his board around and paddled back to where his friend had been. There was a swirl in the water. Underneath the water, Jon was fighting. He could feel the full force of the crocodile's bite as it clamped down around his leg. Then it tried to perform a death roll, twisting and contorting its body around and around, trying to rip Jon's leg from his body, trying to disorient its prey. Then Jon resurfaced, kicking and thrashing about. The crocodile still had hold of his leg, But John wasn't giving in that easily. He swung himself around and punched the crocodile repeatedly on the head. He didn't stop. Over and over, he brought his fist crashing down on the reptile's armor-plated skull. He didn't think it would make a difference. With each punch, it was like hitting concrete. Surely the crocodile couldn't even feel the hits. Edgar grabbed hold of John and pulled him upwards, trying desperately to get him back onto his board. In all the commotion, the crocodile released its grip on John. He scrambled to get back on his board, but just then, terrifyingly, the crocodile's eyes and snout popped up right beside the two men, right in front of them. It hadn't finished with John yet. In a flash, it snapped its jaws at John and locked onto his head. Edgar smacked it on the nose as hard as he could. John tried to pry open the jaws, pulling with all his might. Then, mercifully, the crocodile let go. Battered and bruised, bloodied and torn, John swam to the other side of the estuary with his board. Blood trickled down his head. The lower half of his right leg hung on by just skin and muscle. The bone was broken, the muscle was torn, and his foot was twisted around at a 180-degree angle. He was in a lot of pain. He was fading fast. When he made it to the beach, he crawled out of the sea on all fours and collapsed on the sand. Beachgoers rushed to his aid. Somebody tied a tourniquet around his leg, and another raised his head, resting it on his surfboard. They called the emergency services, keeping him calm as he lay on the wet sand. Was he going to make it? Had he surfed his last surf? When the emergency services arrived an hour after the call came, John was rushed to the hospital in a private ambulance. He was pumped full of antibiotics to stave off any infection and was patched up head to toe. He received stitches to his hands, arms, face, and neck. He had broken his nose, and he lost his right leg below the knee. He was lucky to be alive. He spent a couple of days in the ICU. His two sons flew out to Costa Rica the same day as the attack and stayed by their father's side until he made a recovery. Although John didn't think his punches to the crocodile were making much difference with its hard, thick skin, his resilience is probably what made the animal release him. His son Joran said that before the attack, he and the other surfers never gave crocodiles a second thought. They knew they were in the river and that dogs were occasionally taken by them, but they assumed the crocodiles would consider humans too large for them to prey on. In more recent years, attacks are becoming more common, with 5 attacks in the past year alone. Authorities have noticed crocodiles are leaving the rivers and coming close to the beaches, closer to the tourist hotspots. How long until another strikes again?